Good morning and welcome to Words That Matter, a modern day book club. I'm Lee Smith. Thank you very much for joining us here this morning. We have a wonderful guest, an old friend of our shows. First Over the Target, now Words That Matter. And of course, this is Epoch Times columnist, screenwriter, novelist. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, please welcome again, our dear friend, Roger Simon. Roger, thank you for coming on this morning.
It's my pleasure. And I have to compliment you for one thing here on the doing this whole book thing is one thing that this old book reviewer, because I used to review books for the LA Times, the Washington Post, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Mercury News. And none of them have book review sessions anymore. They've all gone.
Well, I was going to say, used to be the editor of a book review when the Village Voice, America's first alternative weekly, that had something called the Literary Supplement. So I was the book review editor there, and we had a whole monthly supplement. And of course, none of these things really exist anymore. Of course, everyone has always despised the New York Times book review, and for good reason. So yeah, that's what Words That Matter is. We're trying to help readers out. People are dying for books, and they're dying to talk about books. They want to know what books to read, and we try to cover the whole field of old books, books that people should read or maybe need to reread. Whether we're talking about Homer, whether we're talking about Shakespeare, John Milton, and we're talking about new books. And you are here basically to review a new book, and this is by the very famous journalist, nonfiction author, Michael Lewis, and his new book couldn't be more timely, and it is called Going Infinite, and this is the book, Going Infinite, The Rise and Fall of a New Tycoon, and this is a book about Samuel Bankman-Fried and his rise and fall at FTX. And Roger, you've read it. We talked about it recently, and you said that this is a book that well, people need to know about it, and it's a key issue. But I think that your feelings about the book are probably a little bit mixed. So why don't we go into it right away, and why don't we just start talking about the book? It's another thing I want to talk about later is I want to talk about Samuel Bankman-Fried, which I'm sure will come up in our discussion. There's also Michael Lewis's career, really a remarkable career and a remarkable writer. And I think that you think that this is probably not his best book.
No, it's not, but it's certainly fascinating to read anyway because the subject is great, and he had amazing access to the subject. I take it the access was accidental in that, not completely accidental, but accidental in that he didn't know that that SBF, as he's known, Samuel Bankman-Fried, was about to be indicted, which makes the whole thing much more dramatic. On the other hand, it makes the book strange because the book does not include much of what transpired after the fact, and is still transpiring because obviously there'll be appeals, and there's so much money involved. These people have so much money, or had so much, that these things tend to go on and on.
Well, why don't
we know? But
what I'd like to do? I'd like to.
But the writing.
Okay, well, I want to talk about, because I think it's important for people, because it's actually not the simplest story to understand. It's kind of, we understand that there was a big fraud that happened, and it's a digital currency exchange, FTX, but it's a little bit confusing what happened. So, well, first of all, does Michael Lewis lay that story out pretty clearly? And can you explain to us what happened, what SBF, Samuel Bankman-Fried, was up to, and what he was doing wrong that got him in trouble? Or not just doing wrong, but doing criminally.
The nub of the story is that two companies were formed. FTX was a crypto exchange. Now, crypto itself, operating out of the blockchain, is an interesting idea. I'm not sure it's a good one. I I
Hmm.
alternate on it, and in full disclosure, I invested
Hmm.
$5,000 in crypto uh, at I guess a couple of years ago. Uh, because it was
Hmm.
such a fad, I figured, well, I better be in on it. It's now worth 3,000 like that. However, however, all these people, including somebody known in the book
Hmm.
as CZ in Hong Kong, a Chinese guy who was kind of seems to have been the czar, as in CZ, I guess, of crypto, got heavily involved in this thing, and were trying to commandeer the whole thing. Along comes this guy,
Hmm.
Samuel Bankman-Fried. Now, who I think who is Samuel Bankman-Fried? He's a whiz kid born into a Stanford law school family. I mean, who knows what his IQ is, but it's
Hmm.
higher than mine, and it's pretty stratospheric. When he was a kid, he went to math camp. He's an ultra nerd, but the part of his psychology that's different from ours is that he doesn't seem to
Hmm.
get people. and this and this went on, through he became a CEO not getting people. I've been a CEO. I was
Right.
CEO for 7 years of PJ Media. I don't think I was a great CEO, but I was an okay one. But I came from a world where I had some idea of people. I directed plays and movies and things like that, and they require you to know people. This guy has
What
no
what do
idea
you
what
mean by
what
that? How didn't I mean it's I mean
human behavior. I mean, human behavior. I mean, what people think and feel. He didn't think feelings were important. Everything is data driven. On the other hand, the weird part about it is he kept no record of the data or little record, so that no one knew how much money was being spent. Meanwhile, people were investing right and left in this thing because, like me, with my piddling $5,000, a sum that's like a nickel to these people, if we never ever what a nickel is, anyway, uh, it was giving him substantial funds because he was on the cover of
sure.
Fortune and all these other kinds of things.
What do you mean you didn't keep any data?
And, well, he claims he thought other people were keeping the data. They claim he was. I mean, as much as I can understand this whole thing, because it gets really complex. And yes, Lewis does a good job of explaining it along the way, but somehow to me it seems like he too was taken in by Samuel Bankman Freud,
Yeah.
Freed,
I'm seeing
the Freud,
I'm see
the Freud,
yeah.
the Freud slip
I'm
is
seeing some of
interesting,
that in the reviews of the
but
book. Why do you say that it seems like he was taken in by him?
well, I think that's a problem
Hmm.
in general of journalism of the type that we
Hmm.
sometimes do. I think you probably met this problem. You meet somebody, and it's part of it. In this case, he had a kind of
Hmm.
scoop because he got to hang with him in a real way, right? This guy, I mean, did something that you and I would never do. I mean, Bankman Fried would show up or not for an interview with
Hmm.
the New York Times or Time Magazine or
Hmm.
whoever. It didn't matter. And he'd show up with his shoes untied and wearing cargo pants and a torn shirt. And the thing is that everybody thought this was cool, which is kind of interesting and says something about people. And I think that Lewis got taken in with this a bit, and that he essentially, to say fell in love
Hmm.
with Bankman-Fried is an overstatement, but thought he was in on the real cool thing
Hmm.
himself, and then started to realize he wasn't, but he kind of
Hmm.
he doesn't know what to do with it, and the last parts of the book are particularly, I think, feeling like they're
Hmm.
thrown together and there's a certain amount of as Bankman-Fried goes bankrupt. I think there's a
Mm,
bankruptcy in the book too, a moral bankruptcy. I think that there one thing I wanted to
mm,
mention about this book. There is a word that does not appear
mm.
in this book, and it's spelled God.
Interesting. What do you mean?
And what I mean by that is, the overwhelming theme
Mm.
at the beginning, I think, is this idea of effective
Ah, right.
altruism. The excuse that Bankman-Fried and many of his cohorts in this book made for their Gordon
Mm,
Gekko-like greedy behavior, which really it was that they were something called effective altruists who seemingly know best. The reason they wanted to make these fortunes beyond which we as kids couldn't even believe. I mean, to me, when I was a kid, I used to watch this TV show, The Millionaire or something. But, the idea of a millionaire now is like, somebody who's going to be running out of
mm,
money when he's
right.
48. but but to these guys, they could dream. They
Mm,
dreamt of, oh, I got to have 8 million or 8 billion or whatever it is. The number of zeros go on ever. But the excuse that they gave is that they were going to be the ones who gave away the money in a proper
mm.
way that the government doesn't do. Or anything. But yes, they were going to be the effective altruists. You know,
Ah, so that's what that means,
and
effective altruism. Now, I mean, one
yeah,
of the things that
yeah, there's a
one of the things that came out
it's a
afterwards,
neat term in the
the
book.
amount of money they were spending on political donations, especially donations to, I mean, I think they were the second. I think Samuel Bankman-Fried was the second biggest donor to the Democratic Party behind George Soros. So how does that fit in with the effective
Interest,
altruism?
true, and interestingly, Lewis does not really delve
Hmm.
into that, and I think it's purposeful because he doesn't. I think he was afraid to show the what this effective altruism really
Right.
was. I mean, he pushes it away, and he gives you an idea that he makes you think correctly that this is just a lot of young
Hmm.
nerds, misleading themselves, but and which it is. But he doesn't go far enough into what was really going on, where the altruism, quote
Right.
unquote, was going, which you just said. I mean, he doesn't really talk about that, which is kind of
So
interesting.
does there
But in this,
well, there's one account where Samuel Bankman-Fried tried to bribe Donald Trump not to run. I mean, does it? Well, first of all, does that seem accurate to you, or does that seem it's just such a bizarre story? But this is one of the stories that comes from Lewis's book,
that does go on. That's mentioned in
right?
the book, and it seems like it was a fleeting thing that
Yeah.
never happened, but it's something he mentioned. Bankman Fried mentions things
Hmm.
all the time, and he puts out tweets, he does things, and like a lot of people who use Twitter, it goes by the
Hmm.
it's and then there's a big brouhaha on Twitter, but then nothing has happened. So there was a lot
Hmm.
of that. But what something that was really interesting in the book is Bankman Fried went to
Hmm.
MIT, was a super smart guy, was in there with all these math majors who were whiz kids. Now, normally back in my day, most of them would go on into
Hmm.
academia. It seems that a lot of them got the whiff, as he did, of big money, which is interesting coming from Bankman Fried's family, which is I'd like to
Hmm.
come back to that because that's part of the book that's missing. But Bankman Fried, and all these young guys with
Yeah.
IQs of 190 or whatever, they end up they want to go to Wall Street now. And in their case, it's
Yeah.
crypto and other these advanced forms that they're the ones who can understand, and the rest of the hoi polloi don't get. but it's effectively the same thing, and the kind of thing that you see described in Wolf of Wall Street and Oliver Stone's Wall Street. I mean, it's greed is good a la Gecko, only it's done with the veneer of effective narcissism, and also with this advanced technology that only the elect few understand. So it's kind of an interesting
Roger,
situation.
we're going to cut away for 1 second. People who are watching us on YouTube, please make the jump to Epoch TV exclusively, having a great conversation here with Epoch Times columnist, novelist, screenwriter, the great Roger Simon. We're talking about the new Michael Lewis book on Samuel Bankman-Fried. And Roger said something very provocative a couple of minutes ago, which I want to pick up when we come back. And he said the word that's noticeably missing from Going Infinite, Michael Lewis's new book, is God. So, Roger, we're going to pick that up when we come back, and we'll be back in less than a minute. See you in a sec.
Today's recession playbook basically has two big pieces to it. One of them is government spending. So you're going to ramp up government spending to prime the pump on the economy is the logic. And the other one is that you have to lower interest rates. So the Fed brings interest rates as close as possible to zero. So the idea is that companies are going to borrow a lot of money, they're going to invest, and then we're going to get the economy growing again. And what they did in the 1920 depression was kind of by accident, the exact opposite. So they cut government spending and they raised interest rates. You know, within 1 year, we went from something that was much worse than the Depression to soaring economy. That then ushered in the roaring 20s. Okay, they had budget surpluses all through the 1920s. It was just astounding.